A new year is near, and as always with a new year, this means new content, but more importantly, new tech tree lines to grind out. So I thought, why not speculate on what we could see in 2025? Immediately, some of you may already know what two lines come to mind, as they're a bit obvious when you remember the fact that their Tier 8 premium tank representatives have already been released in the game. The Type 63 and Grom both have teased the Japanese heavies and Polish tank destroyer tech tree lines, respectively, with their presence. Something odd about both of these vehicles, however, is their lack of mechanics. Both are just regular tanks without what makes them special. For the Japanese heavies, they have a double aim time mechanic, giving them much better accuracy for waiting a bit after reloading, sacrificing a bit of DPM for better accuracy. After all, if you don't hit what you're shooting, what good is that DPM? The line starts at tier 5 on PC with the Mitsu and goes up to the tier 10 Type 71, which kinda looks like the STB1, but heavified. Which makes sense because the STB1 is actually the Type 74. Honestly, I'm looking forward to these vehicles and would really like to see the mechanics make it into the game. Just because the premium is in the game right now without the mechanic doesn't guarantee that they won't add the mechanic when they release the line, but it is a bit worrying to say the least, whether they will make the mechanic in the first place. After all, we did completely ignore the reload compensation mechanic on the Italian heavies when we brought that line in. And the same could be said for the Polish tank destroyers. They have a mechanic where the further you are from your target, the less damage you'll do, which encourages close quarters combat. With their insane shell speeds and low gun arcs, it's a give and take on getting up close and really making use of that DPM, or staying back and making use of that shell speed. And yet, our Grom on console is without the mechanic, making me really scared of a potential tier 10 Bolskowitza coming in with 2000 shell speed and 800 damage. Hit scan at distance with no downside to its DPM. That has me really worried. Both of these lines are fairly new on PC too, and so to get them so early already is most likely because we're just dropping their mechanics and making normal tanks. Those are the two obvious choices, again, since we have their tier 8 premium representatives already in the game, but there are others we could see instead. It's been a long time waiting for the American Yo tanks to come to console, but they also have a unique mechanic that may be taking time to develop, and one that they might not just drop. They have a reserve track mechanic that allows them to reverse while tracked, which is pretty neat if you ask me, and they may actually be working on them since we haven't seen their premium representative in-game yet. They're pretty unique vehicles, and they have American 120mm. But while we've made all 400 Alpha American 120mm into 420 Alpha guns, these on PC already have 440 Alpha damage despite not being 122mm, kinda like the UDAS 1516 and the PC version of the Kronvon, with both of those having 440 Alpha 120mm. To me though, this line is pretty low on the possible lines to come personally, as we have more evidence to suggest other lines, but this one must be mentioned because of how long they've been out on PC now. Who knows how much longer we'll have to wait for the Yos on console, but they will inevitably come. So, we got the Japanese tank destroyers quickly because they had no mechanic. Two potential lines whose premiums are already in the game may release without their mechanics, thus why they're already coming out, and the Yo's mechanic is taking just as long as it took for the double barrels, so we might not see those. There are still more lines to look at and think about though, and one of them is fairly new to PC, but already has a system or mechanic in the game that we already have, and thus this line could come to the game already because of the convenience. And that would be the Czechoslovakian light tanks. They have glorified autoloaders and sadly no heat up mechanic like they were originally going to. Funny enough though, we do have the heat up mechanic. So this line could be an interesting choice to see whether we copy what PC has done, or decide to give them that heat up mechanic like they were initially intended to have. This line too would be a far more fair and balanced take on something like the Vigilante. I think this line would be fun and fine to add, but I could also see players being scared of repeating the Vigilante. But as long as we don't buff them, I don't think we have too much to worry about. And I think they add something unique in front of the game without being overbearing. Of course, it is possible we screw it up, and the only thing I hope for is no chip damage on these vehicles. If they were to come to the game this coming year, I can only hope that we don't screw it up. And I actually have a little piece of foreshadowing evidence as to why I think that these are more likely to come to the game than something like the Yo tanks. Toy tank mode. Yeah, I might be reading too much into this, but just hear me out on this one. The Yellow Rider is a double-barreled autocannon. Some of you might already see where I'm going with this. Our autocannons are all single-barreled or rotary, the exceptions being the Armadillo and the MTLS. But the Czech Light line is all dual-barreled. So isn't it interesting that for the autocannon toy tank, they didn't choose a rotary form of autocannon or just a regular thin-barreled pea shooter? They chose a dual-barreled style. Again, I'm probably reading too much into it, and it could have just been a stylistic choice, or foreshadowing something else like the M42 Duster that we're getting from the Celebrations event, rather than a tease for Czechoslovakian light tanks. But it is interesting nonetheless, isn't it? However, the potential toy tank teases aren't done yet, because this year they changed the toy tanks from having the jump mechanic akin to that of the Arachnid in the Halloween event to having a boost forward ability. This could be them testing a boost ability for, I don't know, something like the Chinese rocket booster heavy tanks? This one too may be me reading too much into it, but it's entirely possible that they are testing whether they can get the boost mechanics to work in game, and then just add a timer to the boost, and then make the Chinese heavy lines with rocket boosters a thing. It would be really cool if that were the case, and this is the only bit of quote-unquote evidence I have to suggest that the rocket booster heavy tanks are coming. Otherwise, the only evidence I have is the same as all previously discussed lines so far, and that evidence being, it's out on PC and we will eventually get it. But the toy tank mode may suggest that we'll get it sooner than you may think. That's all I'm saying. We're not done though speculating on what we could see in World War II, because PC does have one more tech tree line that we haven't talked about yet. The Concept 5. This is their British wheeled mediums. What do we know about wheeled tanks though? They're really hard to make and had many issues unreleased. And last I heard from BAM was that they are still working out on how to fix wheels so that they can implement more of them without all the hotfixes and post work, instead having them work from the ready. Which means we may have to wait on the Concept 5 line and any other wheeled tank lines we could come up with. Which does kind of segue us into two other lines that we don't know about from PC, because they're not on there, and they'd be exclusive to console tanks. Yeah, we're going to finally talk about some non-PC lines. The first one is actually still a World War II potential line, and that's a console-exclusive German wheel tank line. This was teased and mentioned a long time ago when Pengai was still around. I don't believe it was said whether these were lights or mediums, but it was said to be another console-exclusive World War II line like our Sturmtiger line is, and that would be really damn cool. The only German tank I can think of is the Puma from Battlefield 5, so probably a light tank line. Again though, we do have to wait on wheels to be fixed to get this added, but I'm down to see another console-exclusive World War II line no matter what it is. Of course, talking about console-exclusive, we have our own exclusive tanks with Cold War, and that's where another potential wheeled tank line is waiting. We've talked over all the World War II potential lines, but now it's Cold War's turn. Way back in the season where the Orochi was released, Paingod actually used the wrong splash art screen in his background, and it showcased a French wheelie tank that's not in the EBR line, and that was the Panhard AML-90. This may have indicated a full-on French wheeled line in Cold War as well, but unfortunately because of the previously mentioned troubles with wheeled tanks, it was pushed back indefinitely until the problems are fixed. But we do know that the AML and other wheeled Frenchies are being worked on for Cold War at least. Who knows how long till they fixed wheeled tanks. I am starting to run out of evidence and speculation, but I do just have a bit more for Cold War. They've been asked plenty of times on their dev streams for a Japanese line to come to Cold War, and they used to answer with statements like, oh, we haven't found enough tanks to make a full line yet, and things like that. But more recently, they've changed their response to more things like stay tuned and we're working on it kind of statements. This is me definitely reading too much into it, but they totally could have finished their research on the Japanese line and now could be working on making one, and we could see things like the SDA-1, Type 61, and SDB-1, and more make their way into Cold War this year. But one line isn't enough for Cold War unless they make wheelies finally work this year for those Frenchies to come in too, so a Japanese line wouldn't be enough. We have to have a 1-to-1 ratio of Cold War to World War II content nowadays, so if World War II gets 2 lines like we did in 2024, Cold War has 2 as well. So what else could they do? Now is where we get into pure speculation and wishes, and I have 2 more guesses. Poland and Sweden. Sweden did just get a Leopard variant in the Ultimate Season Pass, and it's not guaranteed that they get a line now because of it, because we already have a Korean tank that didn't get one and a Brazilian line too, but they could totally do more Swedish vehicles that are just from other nations, but also have a branch of the Swedish S-tanks, with the Sturv 103C making its way into the game. I've been waiting so long to see the S-Tanks in Cold War, and all we have is the G.I. Joe Wolverine. And I would actually grind these out whether they're good or not, because I just think they're so cool. And they fit the time frame, so it's only a matter of time till we get them in Cold War. As for Poland, this one does have a bit of evidence again with Pain God. Once he was asked about the PT-91 Twardie for a Polish Cold War line, which is just like a T-72 variant, but he did say something that did sound like a yes and a just wait for it kind of acknowledgement statement. So I was expecting to see it soon, but it's been a long time now. It might not be a full line and could just potentially finish off the Czech-Romanian line with an Era 3 grouping, whether that makes sense or not, just as an Era 3 only line. So not a full line, but a top off of one. I wouldn't mind that personally, and I'd like to see that line finished off too, so it would be nice. But that's it. That's all the lines I have in my head, waiting for and hoping for in both World War II and Cold War, with of course the most likely candidates for our 4 tech tree lines in 2025 being the Japanese heavies and Polish tank destroyers in World War II, and the Japanese and Swedish lines in Cold War. It would be cool if they did Japan and Poland for both, though, instead of the Swedes in Cold War, and gave us that 20 tank. That would be a nice little synergy for both modes to get the same 2 nations, and would be a missed opportunity if they don't go through with that. But of course, the other lines mentioned here are possibilities, but less likely, with the American Yos, the Chinese rocket booster heavies, the British wheeled mediums, the German wheelies for World War II, and the French wheelies for Cold War. All of these would be cool lines if they do release, but I'm not expecting them. Let me know what lines you'd like to see and what you think is coming next year, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.